It's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I'm here today to show you guys a new tutorial on shaped peyote. I received a request from a really nice lady over on my Facebook page, and she had asked me if I could help figure out how to make a sort of half circular, like a half circle shape using the the circular peyote method, where you work the front, then work the back, then you zip the two sides together. I've heard it called tubular peyote a lot of times, but actually I think of it more as circular peyote, because basically you're working your front and back sides in the flat form of circular peyote. So anyway, whichever one you want to call it, this is what we're going to be making today. So when Diane first asked me about helping her out with this project, she uses delicas for a lot of she does a lot of peyote stitch bracelets and with delicas, and she was looking for this shape so that she could make a toggle clasp at the end of her bracelets, and she needed it to be about 1 inch wide. So the first one I sit down to do, I use the delicas. So this is just 2 colors of 11-0 delicas, and as you can see, everything looks really good until you get to this curve. And if you'll notice here in the curve how the delica cylinder beads kind of poke out, and they don't look as beautiful and neat as the rest of these beads here on the lower portions of this shape, which is okay, and there's nothing really wrong with it, but I decided I would give it a try using round seed beads, and I want you to notice the difference of how much more uniform and smooth looking this particular one came out, which this is the one I'm going to show you guys today. I actually wound up having to, I worked out my pattern using this one, but then I had to make some changes to the back side when I was working up the one with the seed beads. And the reason that I did that was because it was basically, I used 15s in the corners, and it was pulling my shape around a little bit weird looking. I didn't think I was ever going to get it done, but I just kept going forward till it came time to zip it up. And then once it zipped up, you'll notice how it pulls around, and it looks really good. Both sides look great. The shape is much more rounded and smooth looking here along this curve, and I just like it a lot better. So that's what we're going to work on. It is a little bit tricky using these 15s in the corner because of them being a smaller bead. As we sew into the corner and out of the corner each time, it's going to appear to you as you work that those beads aren't fitting in. But once you get to the final project where we zip everything up, you'll notice how they look really great. And so I'm going to show you this technique using the 15s. If you use the 11s for your corners, what's going to happen is it's going to make the base wider this way. And what I was trying to do is avoid having that to happen. Here's the two sitting beside each other. And each one of these little squares is 1 inch wide. And you can see that it did make things a slightly bit bigger using the round seed beads, but because I used the 15s in the corners, it limited the expansion of the base of the component. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be using 2 colors of Toho seed beads here. I have some 11-0s and obviously some 15-0s. The colors don't really matter. You will, of course, if you're going to use this for a project, you'll pick colors that match your project. So I've got some frosted olivines here in my 11-0s, and I've got some silverline topaz for my 15s. I've already threaded on pretty close to a wingspan of 0.006 black satin fire line, and I do suggest using a size 11 or 12 needle, because as we sew through some of these corners, it does get a little tight in those 15s. All right. So I went ahead and I dumped out a little bit of each one of my beads here. And here's what you're going to need to pick up for your initial pickup. We're going to pick up 2 15-0s for the corner. Then we're going to pick up 7 11-0s for the flat side of our shape. 2 more corner beads. And then I want you to pick up 19 of the 11-0s for your for the curved section, the round portion of the shape we're making. So go ahead and double count those, because we're going to form these into a round, and basically if you don't have your count correct, you'll have to undo your circle and start all over again. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19. So there we go, and that's really what I want. I want 2, 7, 2, 19. Now, because these little 15-0 corner beads are a little bit difficult to work through, especially when we sew through the first round, and then again when we come sew down to the center to start the back side of our beadwork, it gets a little bit difficult to get through there. You can either pass through all the beads again to form your circle, or you can go ahead and tie the beads into a circle, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and tie them. I tied them the first time, and I think I'll do the same thing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and tie 2 little overhand knots, and I'm going to make sure that my knots fall between the 11-0 and the 15-0. The last 11-0 I picked up, and the first 15-0 I picked up. You know, it's trying to give me a little bit of difficulty, so let me just fix it. All right. So once I've got those beads tied together, what I need to do is pass through the very first 15-0 one more time, just like that. And then I'll zoom in and show you guys how to get started on this project. All right, let's come in just a little bit. So I picked up all my beads, I tied my beads into the loop, and I passed through the very first 15-0 once again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work our first corner. And we're going to, on both of these corners, we're going to pick up 2 of our 15-0s. We're going to pass down the very next bead. And this is just exactly a herringbone stitch, but it's also known as splitting the pairs. Then we're going to position those 2 beads so they sit looking like a herringbone stitch on top of the previous 2 on the base. Once we have that done, we are ready to just regular straight peyote up this flat side of our beadwork. Just pick up the one, skip one, and sew through the next. And do that until you reach the next corner. This could turn out to be a really long video. Since we've done this so many times before, we've made a triangle, we've made the square, a couple of other things that we've done. I've done a circular peyote straight up tutorial. So what I'm going to do is probably going to just guide you guys along the way and pause in between. All right, so now I'm ready to add the last bead to this side. So as I pick up the bead, I'm going to sew through the corner bead, just like that. And this is where I'm talking about using these 15s. Sometimes it makes this bead sit a little bit wonky, so you want to pull it to make sure that bead gets in there. And like I said, at the very end, when we zip this thing up, all of those problems just seem to rectify themselves. So now I need to do the corner. And as we sew these beads in, this is actually row 3. In peyote, when you pick up your initial pickup, those beads account for rows 1 and 2 of the beadwork. So we'll get those 2 little beads positioned in. And I'm going to keep tugging at them until I get satisfied that they look right and not twist. Which they are trying to twist, so let me see if I can get them in there. There we go. Alright, so now I have those little beads sitting like they should. And all I'm going to do for this curved section this time is I'm going to just do regular peyote all the way around. So just continue on, picking up 1 bead, skipping 1, sew through the next, do it all the way to the end. And then I'll meet you back to show you guys the step up. So I've sewn myself around just doing regular peyote. And I'm getting ready to add that last bead. You'll notice that my working thread is exiting here from this bead. I've got to skip one bead, sew through the next, which is the bottom 15-0, and then to step up into the row we just completed, you go through the 15-0 on the top. So you're going to go through both of those 15-0s, and just go ahead and pull your bead into position. And this is what we have so far. For the front side of our component, we're going to be working a total of 7 rows, and we just finished row 3. For each remaining row, well, actually, I should say for rows 4 through 6, each time we get to the corner, we're going to have to do our little increase of our corner beads by picking up 2, passing down 1. Position those beads, and then we are going to peyote out of that corner using the 11-0. Now, every time we're coming across this short section here, which is our our flat side of this component, we're just going to do straight peyote. So you're just going to peyote all the way across, reach your next corner, and then do your little 2-bead stitch at the corner. Where this changes each time is going to be going around the curve. And it's some rounds we'll be doing a 2-drop increase, and some rounds we will not. And this, there may be other ways to make this pattern. This is just the way that I worked it out. And so I thought I'd share it with you guys because it did turn out pretty neat. So now I'm at this corner. I have to pick up a bead and sew up through the top bead only. And then I'll do my little split the pair here, or a herringbone stitch, whichever you prefer to call it at this point. What we're going to do on row 4 is we are going to take 4 regular stitches. Coming out of the corner will be our first stitch. And then we're going to do 3 2-drop stitches followed by 4 regular stitches. So I've done the first stitch. I need to do 3 more. So now, after I've done those 4 stitches, I'm going to do 3 stitches using a 2-drop peyote, which simply means pick up 2 beads and sew through the next bead. And you'll see here at the top the reason for the little slight increase, because as we come around this curve, you can see that we have a wider gap between those beads. So what we're going to do is do a little increase to account for that. And I'm going to make 3 stitches using 2 beads, just like that. And then I am going to go back down to using 1 bead for these last 4 stitches, so that our beadwork is the same on both sides. And I'm going to, as I add that last bead, we'll do our step up here. And as you work this component, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your work stays as flat as possible. Do not pull these beads so tight around the corner that your beadwork starts to roll, because this is a flat type of project until we form the back and stitch the 2 sides together. All right, so I'm ready to add this last bead. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my bead, and I am going to sew through the 15-0 sticking up plus the 15-0 I added at the beginning of the round. And this is why I mentioned using the smaller needle, because it is pretty tight getting into those 15-0s here at the corners. All right, so this is where we are, and this is how our work looks so far. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know that after we step up at the end of each round, it's basically the same thing here. You just work your corner and then work regular peyote all the way across. And so it's going to really make this a lot longer if I film every bit of that. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and get worked around, and I'll meet you guys back when I reach the curve section of our piece. So I went ahead and started my row 5 here across the bottom. I completed the steps to add this next corner, and now I'm just peyoteing straight around this curve. And I'm just going to be picking up a single bead each time as I work the curve on row 5 here. The only difference will be is when we reach those little 2-drop sets that we added in row 4. So I'm stitching along here, adding my single bead. And here I come to the first set. So I'm going to pick up 1 bead. I'm going to sew through 2. And I'm going to do that same step for the next 2 stitches because I added 3 sets, if you'll remember, of those 2-drop stitches. So there we go. And then you're just going to do that one more time and peyote straight down, picking up 1, sewing through 1 to the end of the row, and do your step up. Alright, so now we're ready to work row 6, and I've went ahead and worked my 2 corner beads, and then I'm just going to peyote straight across that bottom flat edge, just the same as I've been doing, and get to my next corner. Once I turn that corner, I will come back here and I'll show you guys how we're going to work the curve one more time. So now I'm working up the side of my curve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by taking 5 regular stitches. So coming out of the curve, there's the first stitch. And I'm going to add 5 single beads, just like as if I was working the bottom, picking up 1, sewing through the next. 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 1 more to go. And now you can see that we're have a pretty decent gap here between these next sections. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill up this gap. Now you can double check to see if you can fit 2 or 3 beads in that gap. So basically you can see that I can fit a 3-drop peyote in there. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up 3 and sew through the next bead. And I'm going to repeat that 2 more times, just like we did previously. Because that's a pretty big gap there at the top. And I'm going to do my last one. And then I'm simply going to peyote down the remaining 5 stitches using a single bead. And then I'm going to add my last bead and step up. Like I said, there may be other tutorials for making this particular shape. I have not seen them or read them or watched them. So I'm just showing you guys the way that I figured out that it works, and it looks pretty decent. And when we get to the back side, you guys are really going to think that I'm strange. So I'm going to add that last bead, pass up through 2 just like normal. And now we're in position to work the 7th round. And basically the only thing we're going to do on this 7th round is instead of adding 2 beads at the corner, we're going to pick up 1. And then we're going to peyote straight across the bottom edge. We're going to add 1 bead again at this corner. And then we're going to come through and just add 1 single bead. When you get to the section where you have 3 beads, you'll pick up 1, sew through 3. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get back in the light. You're going to straight peyote 1 bead at a time up through the side. When you get to this section of 3, you're going to pick up 1, sew through 3. Pick up 1, sew through 3. Pick up 1 and sew through 1. And then just finish off the row with regular peyote. So here I have picked up my 15-0. I'm just going to pick up the 15-0 and pass down 1. And that's going to be our little connection bead that we use when we zip the front side to the back side shortly. And then I'll just peyote single beads to the next corner. I will add my single bead there, and I'll come back and we'll work the top part together. So I've added my little single accent bead here on this corner, and I'm stitching myself along, adding one bead at a time. Picking up one, sewing through the next one, sticking out until I reach those little sets of 3. And this is where you want to be really careful. We've got a lot of work in right now. We don't want to make a mistake. Alright, so now I'm reaching that first set of 3, so I'm going to pick up one and sew through those 3 sticking out. And I'm going to do that for the next set of 3. And I'm also going to do it for the last set of 3. Then I'm simply going to peyote straight down and add my last bead. And as I do, I will only have to step up through the 1/15-0, because if you'll remember, we only added an one accent bead between the 2 15-0s there. We will sew through that, however, as we work our way down to the center of this beadwork. A couple more here I need to add to get my tail thread out of the way. And because I tied a knot at the beginning to for my loop, I'm going to cut that tail thread off before I work the center of my project here. Alright, so here I am getting ready to add that last 11-0. And I'm going to come up through the next 15-0 sticking out like we normally would. Get that bead to pop into position. I'm going to sew across that single bead we added at the beginning of this round. Then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my tail thread here. And now I'm going to sew down to the center of this beadwork. In order to do that, I just need to pass my needle down all of these 15-0s along this corner. And don't try to rush. Make sure you pass through all of them. If you can't get through them all at once, just take your time and work as many at a time as you can. So there's 2. I need to get through these last few. And as I get to the bottom, I also want to pass through that first 11-0 seed bead right there in the center. Alright, so now there we are ready to start the back side of our beadwork. I'm going to show you guys how to do this the next row. Basically, when you sew down to the center here, the beads that you work with are constitute row 1. So we actually already have row 1 of our beadwork sitting here. We're going to add rows 2 through 6. And all we're going to do for the back side of this beadwork is rows 2 through 5, we are just going to do regular peyote. I'm not going to do any increases or any of that stuff. So let me just show you how to do the corners. You're going to pick up one, you're going to sew through one. You want to kind of take your thumb and poke those beads up this way, because we are going to be building the beadwork from here up this way, like that. And we don't want our little beads lost down in there. So I usually just put my thumb in there like that. And then I'm going to go through this last one. So on this particular row, we're not going to sew into that 15-0. We're going to pick up 2 15-0s. We're going to sew through the sticking out 11-0 here on the other side of the corner. So in essence, we're creating a corner, just like that. And we'll position those beads just like we would, so they sit kind of kitty corner to each other. And then we're just going to peyote straight across. We're going to peyote all the way around the circle. And it does get a little tight up in here, but make sure you don't skip over. You want to put a bead in every single gap that you have from row 1 of the initial beadwork. Just take your time and sew all the way through. You might, if you have a difficulty seeing which bead is sticking up, make sure you take your time and take a look that you're getting your bead in the right spot. You can manipulate the beadwork with your fingers and make sure your beads are popping into place. And like I said, all of the rows until we get to the last one are just going to be exactly the same thing that I'm doing right now. And you might want to ask me why I'm not doing the increases just like I did on this. Well, as we work this, because we have these 15s at the corner, this work is going to naturally try to pull itself this way. And when the rows that have the increases here are going to actually work out really super well for a great piece, just like this. So it does get a little funky and feel a little weird as you're working it, but I promise you, if you stick with me on this, you'll be really happy with the end result. At least I am. I like the way it came out. I think it looks really good. And so now basically I got one more bead right here. And I'm at the corner, so I'm going to pick up 2. And also another difference you're going to see as you work these inside rows is that, I think I accidentally picked up 2 beads, guys. Hold on one second here. I'll be right back. Let me check this. I had picked up 2, and I sure am glad I was paying attention before I got too far into my work. All right, so now I'm at this corner. I'm exiting that sticking out bead from row 1. I'm going to pick up 2, and as I pass through the next sticking out bead, I also need to step up into the first bead from this round we just worked, so the row 2 round. And I'm going to pull those beads in and pop them into position. And each time your step up is going to move forward 1 bead. So there was my step up here. The next time my step up will be into the bead that goes here. Right there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and work rows 3, 4, and 5. Just doing a regular peyote and adding my 2 beads at the corner. When I get ready to do that 6th row, I'm going to meet you guys back. One thing I did want to mention, that once we've got those first 2 corner beads in place, as you come into the corner each time now, you will sew up through the 15-0. Add your 2 15-0s, and then pick up a bead and sew through as you're exiting the corners, just like we did on the other side. So we'll be adding that herringbone stitch, or splitting the pairs as it's called sometimes, at each corner now. We just needed to establish the first 2 on this side of the beadwork. So I finished my next row, and here's the last bead I added. You'll notice that I sewed through this bead and stepped up into this bead. Let me loosen it out and I'll show it to you. As I came out of that 15-0, I picked up my bead, I skipped this one, sew through this one, and then step up into that one. Just like that. So I'm going to have to get my visor out. I have links to these on my webpage, and I'll put one here in the description box below, and the corresponding blog post for this. But when I work on projects like these, and especially when it's a cloudy day, I really have trouble seeing these corners, so I'm going to go ahead and flip mine on so that I can see that I'm getting into the proper 15-0 when I come across these corners right here, just like that. It's really important to hit the right beads. All right, so this is row 4 I'm working on. I will meet you guys back here when I finish row 5, and I will show you guys how to do that last row. So I have just finished row 4, and this is what I was talking about. You see, because I'm using the 15-0s here in the corner, see how that's kind of like making those beads look weird? As you work those corners, make sure you are popping those beads in nice and snug as you go into the corner and as you come out at the corner. And as you can see, it's starting to roll. Give us a nice little roll here. And now you can see why that increase is not necessary on these inside rows. First of all, there's no gaps. We're not having the same gaps as we work this row because the work is pulling due to the fact of these 15-0s. So I've got row 5 to do. I'm just going to do it regular, just like I've been doing. And then on row 6, I'll come back and I'll show you what we're going to do there. So I'm ready to work this last little round here, which is row 6. We started with 2, we worked 2, 3, 4, 5, and now 6. On this little long, the short side, we're just going to work it just like we normally would. And we're also going to work the corner just like we normally would. We're going to pick up a bead and sew up through the top. If you need to, you can try to push that apart so you can see your 15-0 a little bit better. Sew up in your 15-0. We're going to add that last pair at each corner here. And I am struggling just a little bit with this 15. There we go. Let me zoom out a little there. Sorry about that, but it's just the same thing we've been doing. Adding our little herringbone stitch. If those beads don't sit right, you can take your needle and grab that little thread right there. And that will kind of position those beads so that they look like they should. Alright, we're going to go ahead and pick up a bead and sew out of the corner, just like we've been doing. And we are going to sew regular peyote up until we get to where this big gap of beads is right here. Remember, we did our set of 3 on the front. Then we came back on row 7 and just added 1 bead in between. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in those gaps on this side of the beadwork, on the back side. But for right now, I've got 1 stitch, 2 stitch. Let's count them out so I can tell you guys how many. It gets a little hard for me to see to pick up my beads when I've got my headset on. I think I'm going to be all right for a couple of minutes here because I'm not doing the 15-0s. Those little boogers are really hard for me to see on the back side. Alright, so I have 1 more to add before I reach that first little big spread. Let me double check and make sure that I'm telling you correct. Alright, so I wanted to double check my work. So I've done 5 regular stitches, picking up a single bead, sewing through the next sticking out bead. I just added that 5th bead right here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pick up 3 seed beads. And I'm not going to worry if they look a little wonky because they will straighten out when we zip this thing closed. Oh, sorry guys, hold on just 1 sec. So you may have noticed as you stitched row 5 that you probably could have fit 2 beads in here at the top. But if we had have done that, it would have thrown off our count for the 2 rows that need to be stitched together here. So here's my 3 beads, and I am just skipping over to that next sticking out bead. And I'm going to pull those beads in there. I can put my finger behind it, and you can see that they don't exactly lay flat. But however, when we go to zip that up, it will pull those nice and flat, and the beadwork will look really, just comes out really beautiful. I'm going to do the same thing twice more. I'm going to pick up 3 and sew through the next sticking out, making sure that my beads don't get hung up on the other side of this beadwork. And I've got 1 more to do here. It's a little difficult to see with these beads. I didn't realize that it was going to be such a cloudy day today. So now I'm just going to do my last stitches using one bead, just like we did all the way along this beadwork the entire time we've been working the curve. Even when we did an increase, as we come back down these two sides, we can just use one bead due to the nature of the shape. Alright, I'm almost there. I'm going to go ahead and finish stitching this row out, make my last corner, and get all the way over to where I do my step up, which you can see the step up is going to be all the way over here this time. And I'll meet you back and show you how to zip this up. So now I'm ready to zip this baby closed, and so I'm going to put my visor back on. So I have stepped up into this bead right here. I'm going to turn this work kind of on its side, and I'm going to sew through the bead on the other side sticking up that's a little bit in front of that bead. So here's the bead I'm exiting, here's the bead I'm going into. And at the same time, I'm going to go through the sticking up bead across on the diagonal back to the other side. And I'm going to do this all the way up to this corner. Make sure you're getting the right bead. If you can't see what you're doing, don't try using two beads at once. It's a little tight at these corners, so it might be easier just to go one. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through this bead here. I'm at my corner. I need to come through the 15-0 on this side. That's part of a pair. Then I'm going to come through that little accent bead sitting there at the top on that side of my beadwork. I'm going to cross over through that bead. Now I'm going to come down through the 15 back on the back side in this direction. And then I am going to sew into the bead on the opposite side. And I think I can go back to zipping the way I wanted to for a few stitches. Like that, 2 beads at a time. Make sure your thread doesn't get hung up on that corner. And we're just going to zigzag these beads together until we reach those sets of 3. And like I said, don't worry if you can't do this little cross stitch one like that. Just go one on each side. You can see already that the 7th row on the front side pulls over nicely and actually works really well when we're zipping this closed. So I'm almost to those little sets of 3. You can see that this one, the bead on the opposite side, is really close to this bead I'm exiting. We want to go through that bead. Now, we're going to pick up those 3 seed beads right there on the back side. We're going to pick up the 1 seed bead on the front side. We're going to pick up those 3 seed beads here on the back. You can see that as I pass through those, that is when they actually start straightening out really nice. We're going to go through the 1 bead on the front. Then we're going to go through the last 3. And it's best if you can get your needle through all 3 of those so you can flatten them out like that. Just wiggle and wiggle. And then we're just going to zip the rest of this just like we normally would. 1 bead on one side and 1 bead on the other side. The 2 that sit on the diagonal. Use your fingers to help position your beadwork and make for a nice zipper closure as you're working along here. Take a look at where you're exiting if you need to make sure you're sewing the right beads. It's pretty easy to see the sticking up beads. But it does take a little extra work to get this funky shape to close up. But look how pretty that looks. And now I'm coming pretty close to my corner again. So I'm just going to do one bead at a time. Just to make sure I get everything the way that I want it. And I think I'm going to sew across that little accent bead right there, just like we've been doing. Come down my other 15-0. And we're almost there. And take your fingers and manipulate your work so that these beads line up the way that you want them to. It's a little bit funky, but when you get it all finished, you will never even know that one side had all the increases and one did not. And especially as you pull around here to the end, it kind of pulls it all the rest of the way in together. And I'm coming up on my last couple of beads here. Pull it nice and snug. And there you have this adorable little half-round shape. Nice and rounded and smooth looking. Manipulate anything that you feel like you might need to. And then you're simply going to work your thread off and end your thread. So that is how I figured out how I basically just used my own little power of thought to figure out how we could work one side straight and then have this nice little curve. If you guys know of another tutorial or anyone that teaches this differently, hey, please throw me a comment and let me take a look at another way of doing it if you know a different way to do it. Anyhow, so that is it today. I hope you guys like this little tutorial. Might have been ran a little bit longer than what I wanted it to, but it's worth it. Diane, I hope you like this little semicircle component and that you have fun using these components for your bracelet ends. All right, guys. Thanks for watching and have a great day.